Thank you for joining me for another episode of A White Woman in Distress. This podcast is dedicated to raising awareness for missing children, teens, and adults who have vanished under heartbreaking circumstances. My mission is simple: to keep their stories alive and to help bring them back to their families. In a world where media coverage isn't always equal, it's vital to recognize that many cases go overlooked. Marginalized groups, including Indigenous people, people of color, the LGBTQ+ community, runaway teens, and homeless individuals. They often face systematic barriers leading to under-investigation and inadequate attention. These groups deserve to have their stories heard just as loudly, whether it's the jurisdictional complexities affecting Indigenous women and girls, the media bias towards missing people of color, or the stigmas facing runaway teens and those living on the streets. These cases remind us that real change is needed. Grassroots efforts, community engagement, and legislative advocacy are essential in turning the tide. You don't have to be on the front lines to make a difference. Even small actions like sharing information or providing anonymous tips can play a crucial role in bringing loved ones home. Every family deserves answers, and every missing person deserves to be found. Before we dive into today's story, please be aware that content may include themes of violence, sexual assault, or other distressing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
On today's episode, we're stepping back in time to 1958, a time when life in a small town in America felt both simpler and less dangerous. We'll be exploring the disappearance of two young people, 14-year-old Donnis Marie Redman and her 18-year-old boyfriend, Michael Lawrence Griffin. They vanished from San Pedro, California on March 1st, 1958. Their story has remained a mystery for over 60 years and is one of hope, youth, and tragic loss. Today, we're going to be looking at who they were and what led to their disappearance, and the many questions that still surround their unsolved case. To understand this case, we must first look at who Donnis Redman was. She was born on June 10, 1943, and known by her friends and family as Pinky. She was a bright, cheerful girl with a lot of potential ahead of her. She was the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family from San Pedro, California. San Pedro is located right by the port of Los Angeles and was known as a close-knit blue-collar community in the 1950s. It was a place where neighbors knew each other and kids spent their days playing in the streets or down by the harbor. Donnis was known for her outgoing personality. People remember her as always laughing and always the center of attention among her friends. She had an easy charm that made her popular with not just kids her own age, but with adults as well. Her bright blonde hair and striking blue eyes gave her a unique look that made her stand out. She was 5'2" and weighed about 105 pounds, but she had a big personality and always wanted to help others. Those who knew her described her as someone who could be both playful and serious. She had dreams of growing up and exploring life outside of her small community. Her nickname Pinky came from her love of all things bright and cheerful, but her life wasn't always as carefree. Despite being only 14, Donnis was said to be mature for her age. Now, side note, most people who are considered mature at younger ages often go through some sort of trauma, which has required them to grow up a lot faster. While researching, it stated that she had her struggles, just like many other teens, especially when it came to navigating love and relationships, which is a weird statement considering she's only 14 and most likely in like 9th grade. Now, moving on to Michael Lawrence Griffin, who is the young man whom disappeared alongside her. Michael was born on February 10, 1940, and came from a modest background. He was the second of 3 children who were raised in a working-class family in San Pedro as well. Like many others in the area, his father worked in shipping and his mother took care of the children in the home. Michael was described as quiet but not shy. At 18 years old, he was on the cusp of adulthood. He was working small jobs in and around San Pedro to support himself and his family. He had admirations of doing something bigger with his life and possibly moving away and starting a family of his own. However, at this point, he had not decided exactly what his future held for himself. His friends described him as dependable and the kind of guy who would do anything for those that he cared about. He stood at about 5'3" and weighed around 120 pounds. Michael was a typical-looking white man but his red hair and hazel eyes made him stand out. His relationship with Donnis was said to not be just a teenage fling. In the 1950s, relationships between younger girls and older boys were not as scrutinized as they are today. While today we raise our eyebrows and disapprove of a 14-year-old dating an 18-year-old, in 1958 this relationship was seen as fairly normal. Which is also odd to me. It should never have been allowed from the beginning of time. Like, it's so weird that a grown man wouldn't want someone closer to his age or even older. If it were a 24-year-old and then a 20-year-old, it would be different because both are fully matured adults who are done with high school and they are out on their own. But that's just my opinion. It still makes me kind of nauseous anyway. Michael and Donnis were in a serious relationship. They spent most of all of their free time together. They were in love, or at least they believed that they were. Michael owned a white 1950 or 1951 Dodge Clipper, which was a car that in many ways was his independence. It had twin exhaust pipes and a loud muffler, which are characteristics that made it easy to spot. That car actually became the central locator, and it actually is the piece of evidence that they did find, is that it was ultimately found abandoned in a small town far from their intended destination. Donnis and Michael's relationship began like many young romances, full of excitement, optimism, and perhaps innocence. Despite the age difference, Donnis's family was aware of the relationship and they seemed to tolerate it. And if they had any concerns about it, they didn't really mention it in any of the articles that I did read. Michael, as an 18-year-old, was on the verge of adulthood, and in his mind, eloping with Donnis seemed like the perfect way to solidify their future together. To him, it wasn't just a teenage crush. He saw a future, and he saw her in it. Donnis, too, was swept up in the whirlwind of this young love. She admired Michael, who seemed older and wiser in her eyes, which, I mean, he was, because he was 18 and she was 14. Together, they dreamt of a future far away from the confinement of San Pedro, where they could be free from the pressure of school, family, and society's expectations. In many ways, their relationship was full of idealism, but it was also really risky, especially given their young ages and the seriousness of their plans to elope. On the morning of March 1st, 1958, Donnis and Michael made a decision that they would change their lives forever and that they were actually going to go elope. In Michael's white Dodge Clipper, they set off from San Pedro with Las Vegas in their sights. The drive to Vegas would take, it was like around 4.5 hours. Now, if they stopped, it'd be a little bit longer, but it was supposed to be a journey filled with anticipation and the promise of a new life together and all of their love and commitment for each other. It's important to remember that in 1958, things were very different from today. The idea of a 14-year-old eloping with her 18-year-old boyfriend wasn't as scandalous as it might seem today, which is very scandalous to me. It's just wild. Las Vegas, known for its quick marriages, was a popular destination for young couples who wanted to tie the knot without the approval of their families. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. A few days after they left, Michael's car was discovered abandoned in Williams, Arizona. Williams is a small town about 185 miles from Las Vegas, which is really far off the route that they would have taken to get there. The car was found unlocked with no sign of Donnis or Michael. And inside the car, there were no significant clues. There was no signs of struggle, no personal belongings left behind, or anything that could provide answers. So it was like they literally just left the car and just took their stuff with them, which is crazy because they weren't even going to be gone that long. It was just supposed to be like, we're going to go get hitched and then we're going to come back. And that didn't even happen. This discovery added an entirely new layer of mystery to their disappearance. Why would they have been in Williams? Like, it was so far off of their intended route, and there was no explanation for why they would have even ended up there. The car, usually so loud and noticeable, was left in this really small town, and it was abandoned without a trace of them, which is weird to me because what could have happened? It's not like it was close to Las Vegas or anything. Law enforcement quickly became involved once the car was discovered. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department took over the case, but despite their efforts, they couldn't find any trace of Donnis or Michael. The investigation revealed no evidence and that they had never even made it to Las Vegas. No marriage license, no witnesses, and no hotel records. Their trail went cold shortly after they had just left San Pedro. Both families were absolutely devastated. Michael's parents were especially concerned because they knew how responsible he was. Michael wouldn't just abandon his car, and he certainly would not let anything happen to Donnis. The Redman family, too, was heartbroken. Donnis was their youngest child, and they couldn't believe that she would just disappear without a trace. The two families continued to search for their children, but despite their best efforts, no new leads emerged. With no concrete answers, the case of Donnis and Michael has given rise to numerous theories over the years. Now let's go ahead and look at some of these theories, but I'm going to go over the popular ones. Theory 1. Some believe that Donnis and Michael successfully ran away and started a new life together. After all, that they were super young and in love and eager to escape the constraints of their lives in San Pedro. But if this theory is true, why would they just abandon the car in Williams, Arizona? Why haven't they been heard from in over 60 years? Both of them had close relationships with their families, and it seems so unlikely that they would just simply cut all ties and just leave. Now, the second theory is a more sinister theory, is that Donnis and Michael encountered foul play along the way. Perhaps they were forced off of their route by someone with bad intentions. The fact that their car was abandoned in a remote area could suggest that they ran into trouble, whether it was a robbery, a kidnapping, or something else entirely. Unfortunately, without more evidence, this theory remains speculative, but it is one that has gained significant traction over the years. Despite the lack of new evidence, law enforcement and the families of Donnis and Michael have never given up hope. The Redman and Griffin families spent years pleading for information, trying to keep their children's names in the public eye even as the case grew cold. The passage of time has only deepened their sorrow, but they have remained steadfast in their search for answers. Over the decades, as technology has improved, new possibilities for solving this case have emerged. DNA testing, which wasn't available in 1958, has become a crucial tool in identifying missing persons. Donnis's DNA is now available for comparison, meaning that if her remains are ever found, they could be identified through familial DNA matching. This has given investigators and her family a glimmer of hope, though the passage of time has made it increasingly difficult to uncover new evidence. The hope remains that someone somewhere might hold the key to solving this case. The pain felt by both families is hard to imagine. For Donnis's parents, the grief of losing their youngest daughter without any answers was unbearable. Her mother kept her memory alive for as long as she lived, never letting go of hope that one day Donnis would come home. Donnis's siblings, too, struggled with the loss. As the youngest child in the family, Donnis held a special place in their hearts. For them, every passing year without answers was a reminder of the future. Donnis would never have a high school graduation, a career, or even a family of her own. Michael's family, meanwhile, was equally devastated. His parents were heartbroken by the idea that their responsible, kind, caring son had just disappeared without a trace. They couldn't reconcile the Michael that they knew with the idea that he would just leave his car and Donnis behind. For them, the abandonment of the car was particularly troubling. Michael was proud of that car, and it was out of character for him to leave it behind without explanation because he loved that car. And he worked hard, and he bought that car for himself. Both families have endured the cruel uncertainty that comes with a missing loved one. Without answers, they have been left to wonder what has happened. And what happened on that fateful day in 1958? Did Donnis and Michael run into trouble on their way to Las Vegas? Were they victims of a crime? Or did they start a new life somewhere, far from the watchful eyes of their hometown? Today, the case of Donnis Redman and Michael Griffin remains unsolved. It is classified as a cold case, but that doesn't mean that investigators have given up. Cold cases, as we've seen in recent years, can be solved even decades after the fact, thanks to advances in forensic science and the power of public interest. Over the past few years, law enforcement has begun re-examining old evidence, hoping that new technology can shed light on what happened to Donnis and Michael. DNA analysis has been one of the most promising developments in recent years, and that allows law enforcement to identify remains or connect seemingly unrelated cases together. For Donnis and Michael, their DNA is now available in missing persons databases, waiting for a match that might bring closure to their families. Now, let's revisit the most predominant theories. The first theory is that Donnis and Michael may have just run away. I mean, as young teenagers in love, they could have just decided to leave everything behind and have a fresh start. However, the fact that Michael's car was found abandoned in Arizona kind of complicates this entire theory, because why would they abandon their only means of transportation in a remote location? It's not like there was a train station there or a bus station or anything like that. It was just as if they dropped the car off and walked away. And then why hasn't there been a single sighting or piece of evidence pointing to their survival since their disappearance? Because no one's seen anyone that looks like them or even reported it. And if they have, it hasn't shown up in any of the news outlets or news articles, or at least I couldn't find anything. Another theory, as we've discussed, is that Donnis and Michael may have encountered foul play. It's possible that they were the victims of a crime, perhaps a robbery or kidnapping gone wrong. The remoteness of the location where the car was found supports the idea that someone could have done something to them, but without any physical evidence or witnesses, this theory also remains that just a theory, which I feel like if it was something sinister, like kidnapping gone wrong, there'd still be evidence in the car. There'd be blood, there'd be something. I'm not sure why they would just abandon the car, even if the people that were kidnapping them, that car was worth a lot of money. It was also a showpiece, so I feel like necessarily not most, based off of all of the research that I've done, most of the kidnappers or rapists or anyone that wants to step in to someone, because it could be a victim of circumstance, but with a car that draws that much attention, that's not a normal kind of thing. Now, there's also a possibility of an accident. Could Donnis and Michael have gotten lost, run out of gas, or suffered a breakdown in an unfamiliar area? Could they have met with an accident in a remote location where their remains have yet to be discovered? This theory holds weight given the desolate area where their car was found, but without evidence, it's also impossible to confirm that as well. So maybe they pulled over because they needed gas, or maybe they pulled over because they wanted to go for a hike and, something just happened, but it's still impossible to confirm. Cold cases like this one remind us of the profound impact of unresolved disappearances. For the families, the pain of not knowing what happened to their loved one is just immeasurable. Donnis and Michael's disappearance has left their families with unanswered questions, and the pain has been passed down through generations. The ripple effect of the cold case is vast. Now, this has affected their siblings, their parents, cousins, and friends, and anyone that really knew them, and everybody is still left wondering what could have been. The toll on their mental health and well-being is immense, with no closure and only speculation to be left. For investigators, the frustration of an unsolved case is equally devastating. Many detectives have come and gone over the decades, each one determined to crack the mystery of what happened to Donnis and Michael. Despite their efforts, they've come up short by a lack of evidence, witnesses, leads. However, they haven't given up. Cold cases like this one are regularly reviewed, and with each passing year, there's hope that new information may come to light. As with any cold case, public awareness plays a crucial role. Even though Donnis and Michael disappeared over 60 years ago, it's never too late for someone to come forward with information. If you or someone you know has any knowledge of what happened to Donnis Redman or Michael Griffin, no matter how small the detail, you can contact the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department at 323-890-5500. Their case remains open, and any tip could lead to a breakthrough. Additionally, you can support organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the DOE Network, both of which work to keep cold cases alive in the public consciousness. These organizations help families of the missing stay connected to law enforcement and ensure that their loved ones' stories are never forgotten. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank you so much for listening and for helping to keep the story of Donnis Marie Redman and Michael Lawrence Griffin alive. Even though many years have passed, their disappearance still matters. It matters to their families, to their friends, and to anyone else who believes in justice for the missing. Together, we can continue to shed light on these stories and more of those who have disappeared. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast. I'm on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook. Every share helps keep these stories in the spotlight. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay safe, stay informed, and let's keep fighting for justice. And remember, if you see something, say something, and do something.